Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and thank you for joining us for our continuing coverage of the pending indictment of President Donald Trump. Joining us to discuss it, first off, is President of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. Tom, thanks for joining us this evening.
Good evening.
If the American people had any sort of doubt now about the two-tier justice system, this pretty much seals the deal, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a one-tier system. It's perfectly consistent. Target your political enemies and protect your political friends. And so we're seeing this across the horizon, really, here on the East Coast. You've got this targeting of Trump in New York City by a leftist prosecutor in a leftist jurisdiction, Democrat, elected Democrat. Same in Fulton County, Georgia. And obviously, right here in Washington, D.C., with the Democrat Biden administration also figuring out ways to try to jail Biden's political opponent. This is a dangerous time for America in the sense that our law enforcement at the state and federal level have been hijacked by partisans in a brazen way to try to jail their political opponents and rig an election, which is obviously coming up next year in 2024.
Yeah. Judicialwatch.org is such a great resource for all of these issues, Tom. And I was actually scrolling through it last night trying to research our conversation today. And it occurred to me, Sarah Palin, as governor of Alaska, was inundated with ethics violation charges, all dried up as soon as she left office and decided to put her political career on hold. Rick Perry, when he was governor of Texas and he was planning on running for president, remember, they arrested him. They had the mugshot of Rick Perry out there. And on and on and on. This sort of thing, I mean, it is heightened because everything with Donald Trump is heightened. But this is a trend we've seen from Democrats. They use these district attorneys and they use the law to try to criminalize being a conservative politician.
That's right. And the test is, we don't want anyone to be above the law, Larry. But when they start bending the law or applying it in this unusual way, it's not like, Donald Trump was caught on video robbing a bank and there's got to be a prosecution. No,
Right.
this is a law that no one has thought to prosecute against any politician in the history of man. And as far as I'm concerned, this is part of the worst corruption scandal in American history, which began with the spying and abuse on Trump, Mueller. They handed, and this isn't just like a metaphorical issue or a kind of an analysis I'm bringing. It's factual. Mueller started looking at Cohen. He handed it off to the Southern District of New York, who went after Michael Cohen, the then president's lawyer, in a very aggressive way, made him plead guilty to fake crimes, which then the other Democrats in the Southern District of New York, years later, after he announced his presidency, pulled out of a hat to try to prosecute him with. This is a wild abuse of power. And I tell you, every elected official, Democrat, Republican, should be denouncing this as opposed to pretending that it's normal and the process has got to just work its way through.
Yeah, and by the way, if I could add to that litany of entities that have already looked at that, let's not forget Congress under Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi. They brought Michael Cohen in there. They looked at this thing too. It didn't rise to the level of even the low bar of impeachment that Congress was using at the time. So it really is outrageous. Also, the way this is being framed, listen, the indictment is still under seal, so we just have to rely on leaks. But it seems pretty reliable that this isn't has to do with these payments and out of court settlements with individuals, as Donald Trump was a private citizen before his candidacy. If you ask any American or any member of the media right now, what's Trump going to get indicted for? They'll say something about hush money and cash payments to porn stars. But that's not it. The actual legitimate so-called crime is misreporting an expenditure on a financial statement. But boy, that's not as sexy, is it, Tom?
No, it isn't. They're trying to pretend that it is something more than it actually is, evidently by tying it to campaign finance reporting requirements. So now the new theory in New York is because Donald Trump didn't spend campaign monies taking care of a personal problem, he needs to be prosecuted. No one's buying it. And this was someone who was a target. Donald Trump was the man, and they found a crime. And as you point out, the Justice Department, who has hated Donald Trump, refused to prosecute him on this. And I tell you, This could be the beginning of an awful period of history for the United States, because what it tells Republicans and grand juries in Republican areas is, oh, maybe they should indict
Right.
Biden. Maybe they should indict Pelosi or Schumer or folks like that. And I tell you, that's how you end a republic, when the tools of law enforcement become a unapologetic tool for politicians to try to jail their political opponents. And that's happened before in the United States. We have to admit that. But here they're proud of it. And
Yeah.
that's a big change, and it's a dangerous one.
Well, and also, Tom, I mean, thanks to the work of Judicial Watch and a lot of media outlets like this one, we've been calling them on it. We've been shining a light on it ever since the ridiculous Russian collusion hoax. You would think that they would be somewhat chagrined, somewhat shy, somewhat bashful, but boy, they're unabashed actually with this outrageous action. It makes you wonder what must be done to bring this kind of outrageous behavior to a halt.
Well, there have been few consequences for the abuse of Trump previously. He's a crime victim. I mean, in this case, one could argue he's the victim of an extortion plot. So, what do the Democrats do? They prosecute him. And if I were in Congress, I'd be looking at ways to cut off funding to the New York state justice system or any other funding, because if that state wants to try to turn President Trump into a political prisoner, wants to engage in what I would call a slow motion insurrection against our Republican form of government, then they shouldn't be doing it in the least with federal tax dollars. And unless there's consequences for this misconduct by government officials abusing their authority to target their political enemies, why on earth would they stop?
Yeah.
Criticism from us isn't going to make a difference to them. A report written by John Durham ain't going to make a difference. Firing them, cutting off access to monies, prosecuting them where appropriate, impeaching, all the tools that you would use to hold a public official accountable for wrongdoing. I tell you what, can't we use just one of them?
Tom, and that brings me to the people, because you're right. Attorney General, district attorneys, members of the Judiciary Committee or oversight, they do have a role here in terms of pushing back, but the people want to do something. I got calls this morning on my radio program. I've been seeing it all day on social media. They want to take this into their hands too. They want to protest. God knows if that makes a difference, and it can get out of hand. We've only got about a minute left, but what do you suggest people do to be engaged and actually let their voice be heard? Because election
Well,
day is a
I think
long way off.
political protests are appropriate, and the left wants to make you think that you don't have First Amendment rights because you're Republican and you support Trump, and I wouldn't buy into that. And I'm not going to patronize people by saying, "Well, don't be violent." That goes without saying. I don't presume Republicans or Trump supporters are going to be violent. That's the left approach. But I think you should call your members of Congress and tell them to get on the ball here. And
Yeah.
you should call the governor of New York. She can shut this down in a heartbeat, Governor Hochul. There are representatives in New York. I mean, if you live in New York, what are you doing to take back your state from these politicians who have hijacked, the rule of law to target innocents?
Yeah.
And let me be clear here. I don't think Donald Trump committed a crime and, it's a waste of time to go after him on it. I think he's innocent. And I think Bragg knows he's innocent, which makes it all the more grave, the abuse that Bragg is engaged in now.
Tom Fitton, we'll leave it there. I'll add one thing, though. You can also go to judicialwatch.org and keep that great organization doing the work that they do. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.